Hello and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Jill Bodensteiner, Director of Athletics at St. Joseph's University. As leaders, it's really important that we're clear regarding our goals and our vision and how those integrate into the greater university goals. We also need to collectively create a strategy and a culture that are going to help us reach our goals. This is an evolving exercise that requires an openness to continuous improvement. That's why I follow the One Question Leadership Podcast, because I love learning as much as I possibly can from my colleagues that helps me be the best that I can be. So my message for the day, keep learning, keep leading.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Jen Baker. Jen is the Director of Athletics and Recreation at Johns Hopkins University. Greetings, Jen. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Last time we talked, you were not the Director of Athletics and Recreation at Johns Hopkins University. You were up there in senior leadership, and probably 2 weeks later, you were named to the chair there at Johns Hopkins. So congratulations, since I haven't talked to you since then.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Right. That was August 2019. Of course, you've been at Johns Hopkins since 2017. And your background in athletics, it's kind of facilities and operations. You did some work, I guess, in real estate for Under Armour. But your career started in the Navy as a pilot and finished in the Navy as an engineer. So when you talk about a varied background to be able to take on a leadership position, you have done a lot, seen a lot, and have a lot of experience.
Yeah, it's not been a linear path for me, but all of the different experiences that I've had, I think, have definitely shaped who I am and how I lead for sure.
Right. And of course, you have your athletics leadership consulting, which I have no idea how you still do that as the Director of Athletics and Recreation at Johns Hopkins.
I don't, if I'm being totally honest, I really don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, something's got to give. And certainly it was that. My priority is definitely with Hopkins right now.
Right. But I think the people who have experience with that did get a lot from it and probably have went on to leadership positions of their own in their careers. Now, the reason I have you on is because obviously the pandemic chapter of world history and specifically U.S. history is something that we have not planned for, but it is something that we have to deal with, especially when we're in a leadership position. And access to information always helps to make educated decisions. Now, we hear Johns Hopkins medicine quoted in the news almost every day. And I wonder how much you being there close to that whole apparatus there, the Johns Hopkins medicine apparatus, how much has that informed your decisions over the last couple months?
Well, first of all, I feel so fortunate that I do work at Johns Hopkins for that reason. I've been super proud as this has unfolded for the leadership that Hopkins has displayed, both from the university side and from the medical side, in terms of getting information out there, doing the research that matters, making sure that people have what they need to make informed decisions around this. And so that certainly happens, on my campus. And as you might imagine, there are not a lot of, I guess, since early March, there haven't been a lot of sort of local athletic department decisions that have been made. Everything really has happened at a higher university level. And I've had the great opportunity to be a collaborator in some of those decisions. And I think having access to that information in real time has just been huge for us. And one of the things that I have really greatly appreciated as I've worked with university partners on some decisions that have been made is their commitment to acting in accordance with the science. I think, so much of this pandemic has kind of evolved so rapidly. So when I think back to the decision that was made back in the beginning of March that we would host an NCAA tournament basketball game with no fans, and how much has changed since then, it really sort of boggles the mind a bit. But in that moment, that week was really the first week that we were really forced to make a lot of major decisions around this. And I remember so clearly in consultation with university leadership, them talking about the importance of making decisions that were aligned with the science, and being so grateful that Hopkins was the source of so much of that science to begin with, and really being able to trust what the guidance was that I was being given, what the recommendations were. And frankly, I will say, I think we think of the science kind of sending us in one direction, but really it was a very measured approach. And there were things that were out there now that out there at that point that were yet unproven. And so really it was a rigid adherence to, this is what's real, this is what we know is real, this is what we're getting, from the Maryland State Department of Health and from our medical colleagues and everything else, and this is the direction we want to go. And I think I've been so grateful for that. And then as of course everything else has unfolded since then, that's the same lens through which all decisions have been made. And again, just incredibly proud of our university's decision and commitment to making decisions through that lens, but also for being the source of so much incredibly important research and information that they have put out publicly to everybody. It's not just for us, it's for everybody in guiding decision making. And I hope that it's been beneficial on other campuses as well.
I think it has. And to that last point you made, I wonder, you guys were one of the first, if not the first, NCA schools to make that type of decision back in March. I wonder if that access to information, did you share it with your colleagues at other schools in your conference or in the nation, as far as this is why we're doing this, here's what we know type of situation?
Yeah, it's interesting. So first of all, a lot of the information that was out, Hopkins from the get-go put out information publicly in terms of the actual science and the research and the data that we had at that time. But in the wake of that, I had a number of colleagues from across the country reach out to me and want to better understand kind of what the process was like for us so that they could either prepare themselves, or in one particular case, they were facing literally a very similar situation the following weekend. And we're trying to think about how they wanted to approach it. And so certainly tried to share as far as wide as I could, sort of lessons learned from going through that decision-making process and what things I thought would be helpful to them as they considered it. But, this is one of those times when, yes, we may be opponents in an athletic competition, but we are 100% all on the same team, and everybody wants to make decisions that are in the best interest, certainly of all of their stakeholders, their student athletes, coaches, staff, fans, families, all of that. So yes, freely shared as widely as I could and as much as it was solicited, everything that I knew and had learned from my own experiences with it.
As we mentioned before, you've been in the chair for roughly 9 months. And from our previous conversation and what I know about you, leadership is a huge thing. And I wonder about leadership as all this is going on. Your background has prepared you for a whole lot. So I wonder what you have referred to, or what part of the bucket you pull from as, I think you started off in the fall with some major victories in terms of athletics there at Johns Hopkins. And then you look about now, we're through the spring and it hasn't been a year and there's a whole bunch of decisions that you've had to make. Talk to me about that aspect of leading.
Yeah, it's been a fun first year, maybe an atypical one, but I think, again, it doesn't matter how long you've been in AD, to navigate the situation that we're in right now is a challenge for anybody. It started off really strongly in the fall, which was great. Had the opportunity to watch a couple of my teams win national championships, which, there's no better way to start off the 10 years in AD than to see something like that. And then it seems like very quickly we found ourselves in the situation that we're currently in. And I think, there are obviously day-to-day challenges with being in the chair that, everybody sort of faces at varying times. But I think there are two things that in particular in the last, I would say, 2 months that I've really come to rely on. One is frankly my background in engineering. And, I sort of joke because I have a master's in engineering, which one says, why would you have a master's in engineering and then be an athletic director? But what I always say is it's applied problem solving. So I'm really grateful, actually. And my undergrad was in engineering as well. And all of it's sort of formulaic in the sense of what do I know, what do I not know, what assumptions am I making, and what is the best framework to apply to this problem to get to an answer. And I think that's kind of a problem solving framework that I go to all the time, and certainly have of late when there's so much information coming at you at once. And thinking through it that way. But I think the other piece, and it's really the bigger piece for me, honestly, is starting my career in the military. So, in the military, they teach you early on kind of a way to think about leadership. And for me, it's like 3 big buckets. Take care of your people. And so do the right thing and then accomplish the mission. And sometimes sometimes that order is kind of interchangeable, but I think all 3 are sort of non-negotiable. And as this all started to unfold, again, I think back to the week where we had to contemplate how to manage the situation with our men's basketball tournament, hosting those hosting responsibilities. And it was sort of in that moment, I had so many different stakeholders that I needed to communicate with. And there were so many different questions that were sort of being thrust on me from all different kind of groups. And, I just came back to like, I need to take care of my people. I need to take care of my student athletes, my coaches, my staff. I need to take care of the fans who are here, their families, right? So you come back to that lens, asking myself daily, what is the right thing to do here? Because I was prepared. I mean, there were some very difficult decisions to be made there. And I'm not afraid to make a difficult decision if I know it's the right one and if I believe in my core it's the right one. But coming back to what is the right thing, and then really what is our purpose here? And now as we live in the environment we do, where we're all working remotely and we're all trying to think creatively about how we find a path forward, amid all of this uncertainty, I kind of come back to that mission piece, and that our mission has not changed. In my mind, our mission, we're here to educate these young men and women and to provide them this educational experience as part of their undergraduate experience, which I believe is so important to their personal development. And then we want to graduate them, and we want to set them up for that life of success, whatever that looks like for them on the backside. That mission hasn't changed. I think we're just being forced to think really creatively about how we accomplish that when we don't have some of the tools that we're used to having at our disposal. And by tools, quite frankly, I mean athletic competition, athletic practices. There's so much to be learned and gained from having that experience. We can't have that in-person experience right now, but how can we still do what we are all here to do while we're working apart from one another, and think creatively about how we do it? And so I honestly come back to that sort of every day. And it aligns a lot with, I did start my career as a pilot, and there's like a mantra that you use when you have to think through problems in the cockpit, and it's aviate, navigate, communicate. So they give you sort of this priority, like first you got to keep the plane running and keep it going. Then you got to figure out, where you're going. And then you got to talk, externally and tell people what's happening. And I sort of come back to that a lot on the daily basis, is aviate, navigate, communicate, take care of my people, do the right thing, get the mission accomplished. And then it's a little bit of a lather, rinse, repeat there. And it looks different every day, but it's really how I approach my work. And it's certainly how I try to encourage my staff to approach their work as well.
You talk about those three things, and how you spelled it out is actually pretty impressive, right? You look at the situation that you're being informed about, right? When you talk about applied problem solving, I'm being informed about this thing that's happening across the world, right? And now it's here in our country. So the people come first, take care of the people, right? And then you have to figure out what the right thing is to do so you can take care of the people, and apply all that in the lens of executing the purpose of being there as the director of athletics and recreation at Johns Hopkins. That's excellent.
It is precisely that simple and precisely that difficult.
Right. Yeah. All at the same time.
Yes.
So, last time we talked, you're a big leadership development person, and, we refer to the habits that we have, right? As we progress through our career, whatever our habits are and whatever we're trained to do, that is the thing we do when times get tough. Like you just mentioned, right? The Navy, the pilot training, etc. One thing you talked about a lot last time we had a conversation was about leadership development, practicing leadership for student athletes. If they want to be leaders and we want them to be leaders, we have to put them in position to learn, and essentially applied learning to be leadership, right? Applied leadership training. I wonder now that, we're working remote, I wonder about that for your student athletes and for your staff, about the leadership training that you are trying to provide. It seems like we've been in this situation 3 or 4 weeks now, so things have probably stabled out and maybe people have gotten into a groove, but you have to start implementing that leadership development in, because that never goes away, specifically for someone like you, who that is one of the core things that you believe in terms of leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this has challenged leaders everywhere to think about how they're practicing leadership. And as much as I hate this situation, I do think I do find some silver linings in it. And I think it will spark innovation in a lot of ways. And I think it tests us to lead in different ways. So for us on our Hopkins campus, we've actually continued our leadership programming. We've obviously done that remotely, but we've forced our student athletes to think about applying the skills that we talk about, rather than quote unquote every day at practice, which is what we talk about a lot. What does it look like in this landscape now? Now that you are communicating with your teammates on FaceTime and Zoom, what are the challenges that you're facing? Because they're going to look different than they do every day in the locker room. Some of them will actually be the same. But then, what does it look like in this landscape, and getting them to think about the ways in which they can tangibly practice here. And I think that's honestly one of the positive ways for us all to move forward with this is I think initially at least, there's sort of a sense of feeling helpless and not knowing what to do. But as soon as you can start to kind of map that path forward, you feel more empowered and in control of the situation. And so that's a lot of what we've talked about is how can we practically apply this? Granted, it's going to be through electronic means. Leadership, in my mind, is a contact sport. So it is best done in person. We don't have that option. So how can we meaningfully replicate that? What does a difficult conversation look like in this environment? How are we keeping teammates connected and motivated? The majority of our sports are Division III, and if we have some sports that are in season that are still permitted to do things like remote film sessions and so forth, and we have some sports that are out of season and everything is entirely voluntary. How do you inspire athletes to take leadership in moments where things are all voluntary right now? I think there's a lot of opportunity to get them to practice, and really the key, I think, is that getting them to connect what they're experiencing now with what they experience every day in a locker room setting, because it's the same skills that are needed, but the wise leader is able to adapt from context to context. And that's exactly what we're being forced to do right now, which I think is a really healthy thing. I think it's a good challenge for my coaches as they think about how they lead in this environment. And I think it's a good challenge for my staff as well. Already we've already seen the need, instead of having informal conversations in the hall in our building, which is how a lot of work gets done, we don't have that anymore. So how can we meaningfully replicate that? How are we checking in with people? And at this time in particular, I think kind of the real human side of leadership is incredibly important. We are all going to weather this differently. Everybody's personal circumstances are different, and their own personal relationship with this kind of stress is different. Taking the time as a leader to really be empathic, to understand how each of your people is reacting to this, and then to kind of shape your leadership accordingly is a wonderful development exercise. But again, I come back to it's also the right thing to do and the way to take care of your people. So I think there are a lot of creative ways. The key is just being thoughtful about how you approach it.
I like what you said there. A wise leader adapts from context to context. Was that on purpose? Is that something you say usually, or did you just make that up as you were talking?
No, it's actually something that we talk about a lot, specifically in the leadership program and we do for student athletes, because, leadership skills are leadership skills. They are skills. You can practice them, you can improve them, you can learn them. But, the skills that you need as an athlete are the same fundamental leadership skills that you need in a family context or in a professional work environment. But the key is that you're going to have to apply them differently. So accountability is one of my favorite things to come back to. Like, accountability looks different in the context of an athletic team than it does in a workplace, but it's still accountability at the end of the day. And so that's what I really think, the wise leader, the savvy leader is the one who has a core set of skills that they're very confident in, but they also realize and recognize when they have to pivot and adapt those skills for the specific circumstances and context. And so, it's not unlike you have a shot that you really like as an athlete, but you have to understand kind of what the setup is. What is your defender doing? If the defender does this, you're going to take the shot this way. If the defender does that, you're going to take the shot a different way. It's the same thing with leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, this has been an excellent conversation, Jen. I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership podcast. I think I learned a little bit too.
Well, thank you as always for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. And I certainly hope that you and all of your listeners are staying safe and healthy during this time, and look forward to a time on the backside of this when we're all back at it. And sports are every day happening live and in person. So hopefully we get to that place sooner than later.
That was Jen Baker. She's the Director of Athletics and Recreation at Johns Hopkins University. And of course, this is Ty Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.